I am the author of House File 3. So you get me first. We're going to go in descending order. House File 3 is an effort that will take existing OLA reports and it will have a look back period for 5 years, perhaps longer. And it will look at those recommendations that have been made. It will check to see if they have been fulfilled. And then we'll create a matrix or a numeric score to say, for example, if it was the Department of Health and Human Services or the Department of Education, it would look back and say, we've had 20 recommendations made in the last 5 years. You've implemented 2 of them, and now we're making a score out of this, and we're giving it to the legislators in the respective committees that they then, as legislators, can use to determine how serious these departments are about preventing waste, fraud, and abuse. And let's just be really clear. What we've seen in the last number of years under the Walz administration has been rampant waste, fraud, and abuse. I welcome the fact that the governor has acknowledged this, but as legislators, we have to take our own due diligence and our own steps to do this, and this is a great way to do so. And let's boil that even further down. When we look at the verified almost $500 million of waste, fraud, and abuse, and perhaps even $1 billion of stuff that we're calculating, that was designed to go and help Minnesotans. And what we've seen is that those Minnesotans, whether they were children in Feeding Our Future or it was in autistic daycare, those people are not being able to benefit from that money. It's gone out the window to buy luxury items that was found that Andy Lugar is prosecuting or did prosecute. So House File 3 is designed specifically to create data that already exists, concentrated into one report that will go out to the legislature, and it will say, here, legislators, is the information. We want you to be able to benefit from the work that the OLA does, that everybody respects the OLA, and being able to concentrate that in one place makes it so that I don't have to go as committee chair looking back 5 years ago as to what did OLA say. I will have it in a report right in front of me. And I think that it is, it's a very elegant and simplistic approach. Something similar has been done in a blue state in Colorado. And I think that this should be a wildly bipartisan bill, much like it was in Colorado, that is solving a problem. Because once again, and I've said this a number of times, every single dollar that gets spent here at the Capitol has come from somebody's wallet. It is our fiduciary responsibility to wisely manage that, and the more information that we can get as legislators to make sure that that is being handled appropriately is the best thing and the best outcome that we could possibly expect. So with that, we will go to House File 2, which is Representative Ben Davis.
Good day, I'm Representative Ben Davis. I represent parts of central Minnesota and northern Minnesota, and I am the author of House File 2. It's time to hold Governor Walz and his administration accountable. Everywhere I go in my district, folks bring this up to me that they want the waste, the fraud, and the abuse to stop. They're sick and tired of their hard-earned tax dollars going through the hands of irresponsible state government. Democrats and Governor Walz have ignored Republican pleas for accountability, and they've also ignored the office of legislative auditor now for years. It's time for that to stop. We've seen at a minimum $500 million in fraud in the state of Minnesota, and as Representative Nash said, it could be upwards of $1 billion. Feeding Our Future is just one of many examples, and it could have totally been stopped. HF2 is part of our anti-fraud legislative package. This bill introduces mandatory fraud reporting for state employees and their agencies. If an employee of a state agency has suspicion of fraud in a program administered by the agency, the employee or agency must immediately notify law enforcement. They must also notify the chairs and ranking minority members of committees with jurisdiction over the agency's operating budget in both the House and the Senate. This bill brings desperately needed accountability, and that is our job as the legislature. This bill requires unannounced in-person site visits to grant recipients and then determining whether nonprofits are financially stable organizations. It establishes criminal penalties for neglecting said responsibilities. With that, I would encourage my Democrat colleagues to show up for work and help us get this crucial work done, to get these bills to the governor's desk as soon as possible for signature, so that we can stop the waste, fraud, and abuse that we've seen these last few years. With that, I'm going to hand it over to the author of HF1, Representative Anderson.
Thank you. I'm Representative Patty Anderson, Washington County, several communities there. I also serve on the Legislative Audit Commission, and I chair the Audit Division, the Audit Subcommittee of the Legislative Audit Commission. Many of you may know some of my other background. I did serve as a state auditor a long time ago, and I also served as a commissioner under Governor Pawlenty. And so I have experience in all of these things, including looking at at fraud issues within the administration in the past. I can tell you it's been shocking for me to come back in the last 2 years and see what's happened in state government. This did not exist. Minnesota was a good government state for all of its history under both Republican and Democrat governors. Commissioners cared. Our line staff cared, and I believe they still do. I don't think this is an issue with the state employees in Minnesota. We've all watched Biden-appointed former District Attorney Andrew Lugar, and last month he said that we have a serious problem with fraud in Minnesota. He said there needs to be a lot more done, and people need to have serious conversations about getting to the root of this and stopping it before it happens. And he went on and he said, I just see it, and no other state had a Feeding Our Future. We did. And no other state has had some of the kind of problems that we've had with government fraud. And that is a fact. And that is terrible. And that is embarrassing. And these are significant, significant taxpayer dollars that should be going to people that they're serving. The governor came out with his budget yesterday. He's talked about cuts potentially, or slowing the growth of spending, shall we say, with seniors, senior services, and with children with disabilities. And why? You've got $500 million that we know about already in fraud, and that dollar should be going to serve the citizens that need services, rather than going to fraudsters in Minnesota. House File 1 is a joint effort. It will eventually, I hope, be bipartisan, and it's will be people that are on the Legislative Audit Commission, legislators from both parties. Eventually, hopefully, our Democrat colleagues in the House will come back so we can talk to them about it. I know there's been concern about fraud too, but it sets up an independent office of Inspector General in the state of Minnesota. Other states have this. This independent office will report to the bipartisan Legislative Audit Commission, just like the Legislative Auditor's Office does too. It pulls some of the agency OIGs out. We have 6 state agencies that have inspector generals. Many of these positions have been vacant, frankly. One was set up. I know there was vacancy in DHS, vacancies in MDE, and that can't occur. But it pulls it out so that these positions are truly independent, And that's what we need, just like we have an independent legislative auditor. We need to have an independent inspector general. The actual details are in the bill. I can tell you we're working on this heavily with the Legislative Auditor's Office, again with bipartisan colleagues, but it has to happen. And I think everyone admits that in the state. This is the year that we need to do it. It talks, the bill talks about waste, fraud, and abuse, and there's different definitions within them. Of course, the one we've seen the most here is fraud in Minnesota. The Inspector General's office would have the ability, complete ability to go into any state agency, would have subpoena power to go into any receiver of funds and get information. If there is fraud, suspected fraud, it would have the ability to tell the agency to stop payments. It would give the Inspector General's office the ability to let other agencies know what's happening with individual vendors or generally these are vendors that are defrauding the state. But it would give us the ability to do all those things and stop the fraud in Minnesota. So thank you. I want to turn this over to Chair Robbins of the Fraud Committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm Kristen Robbins. I am the chair of the new Fraud and Oversight Committee. My district is 37A, which is Western Maple Grove and Western Hennepin County. So I just wanted to kind of tie this all together and highlight our caucus's commitment to ending fraud and waste in Minnesota. Our committee will start meeting on Mondays, next Monday at 8:15. You're all welcome to join us. And our first session is we've invited still current Commissioner Jody Harpstead from DHS to come. She is still in office until February 3rd, and we think it's very important for the state of Minnesota that she testify and explain what's been going on in her agency before she retires. So we sent the letter on Friday inviting her. We have not had a response, but I hope that she will join us and that we can get her perspective on how this all happened, what can be done differently before she leaves that post. Secondly, the commission, the fraud committee is going to be working in tandem with all the standing committees. So State Gov is going to be hearing all these bills. We plan to hear some bills, but we also will be doing investigations of things that come to light. And to that end, we're creating a website that will allow people to alert us to whistleblower things they've seen in their agencies or people on the grant side who've been receiving grants and think something isn't right. So that hopefully will be up in the next week or two. We're working with House IT on that. But this is really important. Over the last week since this committee has been announced, I literally have lost track of the people who have reached out. And Minnesotans care about good government. We've always prided ourselves on that, and people want us to fix this problem. So the committee is forming. We hope the work will be bipartisan. Fraud is not a partisan issue. I don't care who you talk to. People want their money spent wisely, and they want people to get the services they deserve. So we look forward to our Democrat colleagues coming back and joining us in this work. I was happy to see the governor's proposals. I have to say, he's Johnny-come-lately to this issue. I have served in the legislature for 6 years. I have been calling out these issues since my freshman term on the Workforce Committee, when there were problems with some of the workforce development grants that were coming through our committee. And I've had a bill that I worked with on the OLA for 4 years that would deal with an enterprise-wide grants management system, some of the same ideas that are incorporated in some of the bills we talked about today. And that bill has never had a hearing in the whole time I've carried it. And none of these issues, $250 million in Feeding Our Future fraud, autism centers, sober homes, CCAP fraud, and again, an issue left over from my freshman year, never has the legislature held a hearing on any of this. We are derelict in our duties to provide legislative oversight. It's a separation of powers issue. And so now this committee is formed, and we will start doing our jobs as legislators, hopefully in a bipartisan fashion, to provide oversight of the executive branch. That is our duty, and I look forward to it. So we're happy to take questions.
Did anybody, I watched the committee this morning, did you have a fiscal note? Does anybody, because it sounds like new work, new jobs, and a new office.
Well, Mary, you must not have been watching committee close enough. There was a fiscal note in the packet, and I made sure that any bill that comes through my committee does have a fiscal note. So yes, we had a fiscal note, and we moved it out of committee, and it is now in the possession, or it will be in the possession of Ways and Means.
And cost, what are ballpark costs?
On House File 3, it's $240 some odd thousand, and we'll carry that in the state government finance bill.
2 or 3 have fiscal notes?
Yeah. Thank you, Mary. I'm one. We do not have a fiscal note yet, and there will be an author's amendment when it's heard on Thursday. So after that point, as this evolves, because there are positions within the current state agency OIGs that are being transferred to the new, independent OIG. But some of, the question is, that we want to do this right. And so there are some things that may stay and some things that may go within those things. So we really have to think it through before we can get a fiscal note.
The principle is you have to spend some money to save some money?
I think that will be the case. Yep.
Representative Anderson? Oh.
Yeah, HF2 does not have a fiscal note yet. I'm expecting it next week, but I've been assured by the state gov chair that we'll be saving Minnesotans enough money that they'll want us spending money in this area.
Yeah, thank you.
There was some talk in Legislative Audit Commission assigning these duties to the existing OLA to just add to their portfolio. Why did you decide to make it a separate entity?
First of all, the legislative auditor herself, doesn't think it's appropriate. I also don't think it's appropriate. And in talking to some of my fellow members on the Legislative Audit Commission, that's the direction we're going. They're two very different things. What the legislative auditor does is essentially is different from what this entity will do. This entity will do more investigations. It will have a fraud, and the legislative auditor has a fraud hotline, but it will do more. It will go way beyond that. And it will actually be able to investigate receivers of the funds too, not just the payees.
Can they cooperate?
Yes, the idea, and you can talk to the legislative auditor because I'm working very closely with her on this. They will cooperate and they'll have the ability to share information back and forth. They will both answer and be appointed by 6-year terms also, same thing as what we're doing. They'll both answer to the Legislative Audit Commission, which as you know is completely bipartisan and a wonderful commission, 3 in the House, 3 in the Senate, both parties. So they'll sort of work side by side. One thing we still have to figure out is because this new OIG will be essentially answered to the legislature who is going to audit them. So it will not be the legislative auditor. It's a minor thing, but we have to figure out how that's going to occur.
Do you think
So-
the ideal person for that job has a law enforcement background?
Yes.
Or an accounting background?
Both. Probably accounting, but there needs to be at least an assistant commissioner that has law enforcement background. There needs to be legal too, attorneys on the staff. So,
What about the state auditor as a former state
Yep.
auditor? Should some of these duties be done? Could it be statutorily rewritten? I mean, we do have a title of a state auditor.
yeah, thank you, Mary. The state auditor's oversight is local units of government, and they do have a special investigations division which looks into allegations of this sort within local units of government. So it's an office, assuming it's similar to what it was, it's generally staffed with accountants and attorneys. And it's a smaller office, but they look at local units of government. This OIG is looking at state government. So it's the same reason that we have a legislative auditor and a state auditor. The legislative auditor looks at the state agencies. The state auditor looks at local units of government. So let me give you one more reason. The state auditor is a elected official, and generally the state auditors have not been partisan. They've tried not to be partisan, but they still are. The legislative auditor is absolutely not partisan, is appointed by a nonpartisan commission, and it is very, very, very important that this office, this new office, is nonpartisan.
Representative Davis, you said
Thanks.
your bill included criminal penalties
Gotcha.
for neglecting responsibilities. Can you unpack that a little more, what that means?
Well, first of all, I think state employees should understand that there's a great deal of responsibility that comes with their job. And it's already actually in statute that state employees are very much encouraged to report suspected fraud. So yeah, I think right now we're looking at changing that to they must report suspected fraud, and neglecting to do so could result in criminal penalties.
What type of penalty?
Perhaps a misdemeanor, so.
Have you had any discussions just on the Senate side? There's some crossover, I know, I think it's Heather Gustafson, DFL, has the OIG at the Senate. Just how are those conversations looking across chamber?
I'd say that we have a very good, solid working relationship with the Senate DFL. Would love to make a good, solid working relationship with the House DFL if they choose to return to the Capitol and join us in doing our work. So I think that that's the benefit of having those relationships. We can wander over to the Senate. They are there, and they make themselves available to us.
Have you tried to reach out to House Democrats and get co-authors? I've heard there's no co-authors yet on the committees.
Well, I mean, the best way to bump into somebody is when they're actually in the same building as you. So and when they do that, then we'll have a greater opportunity to do so.
Representative Nash, can you talk a little bit about your bill, when you're talking about gathering this data, who is the person doing that to then create the matrix? Is it OLA? Is it, another state agency?
Well, the best matrix is with Keanu Reeves, but so the OLA actually has all of these things. So what we're asking is for the OLA to take those different reports that they have done and create the matrix out of that, and then the scoring and weighting of those. Because as you know from reading OLA reports, some of them can be as simple as have a plan for the security of doors. When you're talking about access to buildings. And then you may get all the way up to a lot of heavy fiscal stuff. So a lot of that will be weighted along the way by the OLA who already has these reports. So just to stress again, this is not asking or directing the OLA to create new data. It's to aggregate existing data that they have and assign values to it so that you can understand when agencies have fulfilled it or when they have not.
Would OLA be the entity then to go to DHS and say, hey, we're checking in on, did you implement X, Y, Z from our reports?
Yeah, the beauty is they already are doing that. So they do a regular periodic checkup to say, here are the 20 recommendations that we've made to you. Please tell us those that you have implemented. And as the OLA said today in committee, that they then also use their office to go back and verify that those have been done. And it's no different than in each of your companies. You have auditors that come in over the course of a year and they say, hey, WCCO, you have to do these following things to be in compliance with your licensing and your accounting and all those things. Those auditors come back and do follow-ups to make sure that those have been implemented. I see that as a board member in the various colleges that I'm on a board member of, and they come back and they say, you're out of compliance here, you're out of compliance here, and you're out of compliance here. That's where this information is going to be coming from. It's data that the OLA has with follow-up that they're actually doing as we're moving along.
So this is really just the new thing here is this matrix where you can then take that information to say, you guys are implementing the little things, but not the big thing that would really make systemic change here.
Exactly, and the beauty of this is a good chair can look for this data and gather it on their own, but now many legislators choose not to. It's going to be prescriptively provided, much like a fiscal note would, to say, here is this information as you're going about appropriating money. This is another thing that would be in the bill packet at the beginning of a session, and the OLA would come during one meeting ostensibly to say, here for this committee, let's say DHS or the Department of Education, here are the recommendations that have been made, and here are the ones that have been fulfilled.
Are you surprised in this day and age that the Office of Legislative Auditor is still so respected when so much distrust of government and so much partisanship? How has Minnesota, in your opinion, maintained that through different people running the office and through different parties?
Yeah, so I've known I've been here for 11 years now, and Jim Nobles was the OLA prior to Judy Randall. The thing that I respect, and I think all of us do, all 201 legislators, is their absolute dedication to having the most consistent strike zone that you could ever find in government. That they call it out where there's waste, fraud, and abuse. And then I've seen them say, well, because I call them a lot, they say, well, Representative Nash, I think you might be missing something. They're actually doing a good job here. So they have no dog in this fight. And I made the joke before, the OLA is unlike Angel Hernandez, the now retired baseball umpire, thank God, who had a wildly inconsistent strike zone. Their strike zone is extremely well defined and extremely well adhered to.
But how much does it surprise you in today's age?
I am not surprised because of the quality of the people who fulfill those offices. They are high caliber people who, they wake up, they want to do government better.
Do you have any thoughts on the MMB report from last week that said state agencies have fully or partially resolved 96% of OLA recommendations?
Well, I would say don't believe everything that you read coming out of state government about itself. I mean, I think that the OLA is probably the best group to say that, because if you ask your kids, hey, have you done your homework, what is the answer always going to be? Oh, absolutely. And then you go and you double check, and it turns out that they may not have done all of their homework. So that's what I would say about that.
Could I ask Rich and Anderson, Liz,
Yeah.
do you have?
How much time do we have left?
Got time for probably one more. Got committee here.
Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask you about President Trump bringing Minnesotans who are involved in J6. Any thoughts on that?
I don't even know who they are, so, but do you have a final question for, because I want to make one more comment to
We really
follow
want
up.
to focus on waste, fraud, and abuse.
Yeah, I don't know.
We're not talking about anything else.
Yeah.
You guys referenced Governor Walz's proposals on waste, fraud, and abuse. I didn't really hear a lot of them discussed here, so I wonder if you're open to some of them, particularly using AI to try and flag some of these.
Yeah.
Yeah, so being the computer nerd at the Capitol, I've actually recommended AI as a sort of behind-the-scenes thing to look for irregularities. That's something that will come before the State Government Finance Committee, and I look forward to having those conversations. It is a tool that can be used to look for irregularities, and I think that it would have found some of those things that would have been popping up with Feeding Our Future. Certainly, the number of children that were being reported to be fed on a monthly basis is larger than a third of our entire state population. So I actually have had conversations, and I actually had it with the commissioner of Minute before the governor came out with his idea. So I'm wondering if the governor just decided to borrow my idea and then make it his own. So I think with that, we're very grateful for your being here today, but folks have committee.
Just would AI find something like Feeding Our Future, like the name generator, is that something?
Absolutely, it would have. Yeah, absolutely.
It's been something
Yep, yep. All right.
Any more questions, reach
Yeah.
out, we'll get you guys connected.
Can I just say, they knew that it was.
Continue, this would change some of that though.